now that you have some idea about what public funding is, there are different criteria when you want to provide direct public funding. You can use a threshold. If let's say you obtain a political party obtain above a certain amount of vote, then the party qualifies for public funding. That's a common criteria. Or you can also limit public funding to parties with representation in parliament. So only parties that are in parliament get the public funding. Okay, so and then you can, of course, you can combine those different criteria, right? Okay, this is an example from Australia, right? Australia have public funding, and this is the allocation based on their 2019 federal elections. So this is from Indonesia. Our friends and colleagues here, you probably be more familiar with this. Recently, there is an increase actually in the amount of public funding in Indonesia, and the suggestion actually comes partly from the head of their anti-corruption agency, which is very interesting, right? It's not just the political parties that say it's the right thing to do. It's also the head of the anti-corruption agency, because he said without substantial public funding, you actually leave a lot of room for private donors and corruption in political parties. Okay, in Canada, they actually provide upper tax credits for political donation. So in a way, it's indirect public funding, meaning that the state does not provide money directly to the party, but they provide tax credit for people who make donations to political parties. And the breakdown, I provided it in the table. More details are in the report, but for time purposes, I'll go rather quickly. So in UK, they have it as well. Direct funding, mostly for opposition parties, because the UK argue that the government already have all the bureaucrats and everything to support them. So opposition needs some public funding to be able to perform their role as check and balance effectively. And of course, they have indirect public funding as well. Okay, so having done those research based on case studies and so on, what are our recommendations for Malaysia? We have 3 recommendations. The first recommendation is to provide vote-based direct public funding for regular party and campaign expenses. This amount will be proportionally allocated based on vote share. Vote share, not seat share, okay? Why is that? We'll try to explain later. Okay, how much money should we set aside? We actually take the last 10 years federal budget, national budget, and we take the median of the last 10 years of federal budget and multiply it by 0.05%, only 0.05% sahaja. And we divide this amount into 2 parts, okay? So if you take 0.05% of the median budget for the last 10 years, you have 133 million, okay? 133 million annually. You divide this amount into 2 parts, 123 million for the first recommendation, which is based on vote share, and 10 million for the second recommendation, which I will explain later. How do we determine eligibility? Which party should qualify? Okay, we propose a regional and low threshold to be set at 2% of the last federal election. To qualify, parties should pass the threshold of 2% votes in any of the 3 regions in Malaysia, which is the Peninsula, Sabah, and Sarawak. Okay, we need to have a threshold, because if not, every Tom, Dick, and Harry party will contest and take advantage of the scheme. But the threshold cannot be too high, because it will be disadvantage to the smaller and new parties. So the global average is 3.5%. However, we do not advocate for the nationwide threshold, because it will discriminate against Sabah and Sarawak. That's why we have a regional threshold. Okay, how do we decide how much each party receive? Like I mentioned, based on vote share in the most recent election, yeah? And to provide a perspective of how this will work, we actually conducted a simulation based on the result from the past general election. Okay, very quickly, this is a simple table that we did. If you could look at the valid votes received and then convert it to percentage of the total valid votes, then you multiply it by the 133 million. This is how much they will get. So under this simulation, based on the GE14 scenario, we will expect Barisan Nasional to get about 41.5 million, PH to receive 56.1 million, PAS to receive 20.7 million, and Warisan to receive 2.9 million on an annual basis, right, to the following cycle's election. Okay, this is actually a very small amount. Like we said earlier, it's only 0.05% of the budget. Okay, the funds should not be distributed based on the number of seats won because it will cause involuntary funding and disgruntled taxpayers. So we just give one example, right? In a certain Jerai parliamentary constituency, the past candidate won actually about the vote share yang he dapat is only 33.9%. The majority of the voters in that area, 66.1%, actually did not support the past candidate. But they just win because we had a first past the vote system. So this would not be fair nor popular. That is why we must go with vote share. Okay, what is the purpose of public funding? This will help political parties to operate more autonomously without having to rely exclusively on private funding. This will reduce the influence of rich private donors, which actually contribute to all sides, help smaller parties who do not have resources or access to rich corporations, and will slightly discharge political parties from excessive fundraising. This will enable our elected representatives to focus more on their parliamentary and state assembly duties in the service of public interest. How will the money be spent? Well, political parties need funding to operate regularly, even in non-election period, right? They need to pay their staff. They need to provide policy research for their legislator, provide political education. In addition to all that, actually, we propose that 25% of the fund received by parties to be earmarked for policy development research. So this is what happened in UK. Yeah? So for UK, they have a policy development grant as well. And basically, our proposal actually supports another recent study done by Institute for Research and Development of Policy, IRDP. In their research, they found that members of parliament in Malaysia are not really well-versed and engaged in public policy issues because they are not trained in that, they do not have the adequate awareness, they do not have enough staff to be able to do that. So if we have this public funding, which is earmarked for policy development research, this will empower our elected representatives and political parties to participate more effectively in legislative issues, as well as scrutinizing government policy decisions. Okay. Recommendation 2 is basically introducing a different form of public funding, which is seat-based, specifically to promote women representation in Malaysian politics. So this is a special recommendation to boost women representation in parliament. So how do we earmark this? So basically, the more female members of parliament that a political party has, the more public funding it will receive on an annual basis. So you can see here that basically this policy design is designed in such a way to incentivize parties to field women candidates. Yeah, it is important that we provide this based on the number of female members of parliament that they have, and not candidate. Why not candidate? Because we do not want political parties to just setakat cukup syarat, right? Basically means they just nominate the woman even in seats yang they won't be able to win, just so that they qualify for those public funding. And this is a very important issue because actually Malaysia ranked 142 out of 190 countries on women's representation in parliament. Yeah, this data is by Inter-Parliamentary Union, IPU. 142 out of 190 countries. We are quite bad in that ranking. So therefore, we believe that this proposal should be supported by female elected representatives and the women's wings in all the different political parties for this proposal to boost women representation in politics. Okay, just very quickly, our third recommendation is introduce indirect public funding through subsidies for broadcast, printing, postage, and free usage of public and government buildings at certain time, especially during campaigning periods. So these can be done easily, right? Because it costs much less. So at least 3 forms of indirect party funding to be implemented is very easy. Create a bill that allows free postage for one election communication to every address or elector within the relevant constituency. This has been done in many countries. We just have to replicate their laws and so on. Provide the free use of public buildings, especially during election period, subsidies for parties and candidates for printing. All these are not new. We can definitely find, templates, legislative templates from different countries as well. Okay. Having said all this, of course, we want the federal government to do this, but actually state governments can lead the way as well. State government can conduct a pilot project, basically, right? An experiment and lead the way so that, people see that it can be done, there's appetite for this, and then the federal government follows suit. This is done in Australia. In Australia, actually, it's the regional government that started first, and then the federal government follows suit. So nothing is stopping the state governments from implementing public funding at the state level. The same mechanism can be applied. And we especially think that progressive and richer states such as Selangor, Penang, Sarawak can lead the way. Okay, I will briefly end by saying that there are benefits from introducing public fundings, right? The outcome for political parties, they will receive regular source of funding, regardless of whether they are in government or opposition. It provides safety net for parties that traditionally rely on state resources, right, in the event of electoral turnover. So even if they lose in election, they'll still get some public funding, rather than being all or nothing, right? If you're in government, you get this. If you're not in government, you don't get anything. So that is a very risky thing, which kind of explains why all the different political parties selalu nak return sangat to the government. Okay, they will have funds to conduct policy research, and they will have funds to nominate female candidates. But perhaps what's more important is the outcomes for citizens, the people, the rakyat. We will have more professionalized party politics. We will have policy-centric politics and more effective parliamentarians who can perform their duties. We will have decreased risk of defections, hopefully, and reduce private influence in party politics. So in conclusion, policymakers actually have a wide range of options to enact public funding. It is not all or nothing. You have different forms of public funding in different levels, which we can pick and choose what package that we want. So therefore, political parties, civil society groups, and the Election Commission can bring about a multi-partisan effort to initiate public funding to make our party politics more stable, institutionalized, policy-driven, gender-balanced, and professionalized. Okay, that's all I have for today. I'll pass the floor to Aira and Dr. Kumar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Ooi. Thank you for your brief presentation on the public finance, implement public funding for political parties. You have 3 recommendations, but there are political finance issues, reforms are much bigger, but you are focused on public funding. Okay, we start with our first panelist, Ms. Aira. Can we hear from your thoughts on the recommendation proposed by Mr. Ooi Kok Hin? Is it realistically can be implemented and enforced, Ms. Aira?
Thank you so much, Dato Halim, Kok Hin, for your great paper that I think has been a good resource even for my own work and ideas. My fellow panelists, Perludem and Bersih, for the invitation to speak this morning. So I don't have that much to add. I mean, I think Kok Hin's paper is very comprehensive, but perhaps I can just bring up a few, maybe 2 key concerns and also 2 further advantages that I think a public funding system can have to our political climate in Malaysia, right? So the first key concern that I would invite everyone who's attending this webinar today to perhaps think about is the fact that in Malaysia, some political parties are much richer than others, right? So why do I bring this up? So over the past few months, Ideas has also been very actively engaging with politicians from across the political divide to to try and get our politicians on board to reform our political financing system. And we discussed about a lot of things, but one of them is public funding. And what we find is that most, if not all, of the politicians we speak to are very supportive of public funding. So they realize the importance of having stable finances in their party, and they are also quite excited with the idea that they don't have to then rely so much on private donors that usually comes with strings attached, as we all know. But I think something that perhaps haven't been thought about more deeply is just the inequality in wealth between our political parties in Malaysia, right? So you have parties in the, like for example, like UMNO and MCA, who own a very, very large network of businesses and also assets all around the country that's worth up to billions of ringgit, according to research that's been done by many experts such as Professor Terence Gomez, for example. So and why am I bringing this up? Because I think that when we talk about public funding, and of course, Kok Hin has presented the formula and how we can do the mechanisms of it, which I think is really worth considering. But I would also like to maybe put this question out there, which is, some parties in Malaysia perhaps don't really need it as much as other parties, right? And the fact that no matter how much money that the state can give to political parties, parties that own this large network of businesses and assets that's very, very lucrative, it will not, no matter how much the state gives, it will not be as much as how much they can get from their own business networks. That's very, very extensive, as we all know. So that's number one. That I would like to just throw that question out there. Secondly is the transparency requirement, right? So I'm not sure if I've read Kok Hin's paper, but it's a while ago. So I can't recall if the proposal for public funding comes together with a requirement of transparency in expenditure, and also transparency in the private funding, because the funds from the state is not 100%, right? So the parties will still need to raise private funding as well. So for me, the obstacle here would be the trade-off that the party needs to agree to get the public funding, which is transparency. In you need to disclose how you spend that money, you need to disclose where you get your private funding from, and all of this needs to be available to the public, because that's the whole point of transparency in political financing. And from my own experience in talking to many politicians from different parties, the hesitancy is always there, which is the transparency part. Many parties, especially some of the opposition parties, are always concerned about backlash and also retaliation that their donors might get if the information becomes public. And I know that this has also been a point of contention within certain parties when it comes to agreeing to a transparent political financing system. So I think that this requirement of transparency needs to be non-negotiable for parties to receive public funding, of course. But I think that it might be quite a long journey for our political parties to be comfortable with that and to be accepting of that fact, because it's just non-existent in the current political culture, just completely non-existent. Yeah. So those are my two concerns. I wouldn't want to go into too much for today. On the advantages, I would like to add some comments. I think the earmark funds for women and for policy research is extremely important, and I hope that it is, if we ever have this public funding system in Malaysia, I do hope that it does come together with these two proposals, because as Kok Hin shared, our women participation in politics in Malaysia is extremely disappointing at the moment. And also, we all know how our politics is not centered around policy at the moment, right? It's very personality driven. So I think these two elements are extremely important, and I'm hopeful that it can be a catalyst or an incentive for parties to further invest in women leaders and also in policy research, which is extremely important. Secondly, I think I like the point about institutionalizing political parties and professionalizing politics. And I just would like to add the point that public funding, to me, the biggest appeal is that political parties then don't have to rely so much on one or two or three individuals in the parties who are extremely rich and who hold the coffers of the party, and then which results in situations where it is extremely difficult for these individuals to then be voted out in party elections, because they hold on to the coffers of the party, and which then sort of holding the party ransom basically with the amount of money that they have. And we see this across many parties in Malaysia, I think, some more than others. And I really hope that with the introduction of public funding, we can eliminate this culture of money politics and culture of individual personalities being indispensable because of the amount of money and cash that they have, which they use in party elections and distributed to cronies and all that, which has really been an endemic problem in Malaysian politics, right? So to me, that is the biggest appeal actually of public funding, to really take away the influence of extremely rich individuals in political parties, and which will then institutionalize the party, and hopefully adding to the maturity and sustainability of political parties, away from taking that power away from the individual. So those are my comments for now, and I look forward to a good Q&A session where I will be happy to discuss some more points further. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Aira, for your comments. Dr. Kumar, the same thing. Did you have thoughts on this recommendation by Mr. Ooi Kok Hin? And is it realistic to implement and to enforce? And do you think this public funding legislation even the playing field for political parties? Yes, Dr. Kumar.
Okay, thank you, Dato, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this session. I think it's a very important topic, and I think, yes, obviously, what Saudara Ooi has presented is I think, realistic and very important. But I think he's been a little bit, the report itself is a little bit too kind to the political system. I would say that the current system of political funding actually is a major source of corruption in this country. Parties that are in power use their positions of power to get money from the private sector by giving contracts at better terms than they should be given. That's a fact. And that happens in all the different parties. Whichever party is in power does that. Land is being used. Land assets of state governments uses land assets, give it to the GLCs. The GLCs then have joint ventures with private developers, and the price of housing goes up. So it's all of this. The thing is, the basis of it is politics is expensive. It's expensive to run a party. It's expensive to open branches, to have charamas, to have staff, do research. It is expensive. So they expect political parties to raise the money for themselves. This is what happens. So actually it feeds corruption. there is a link between political parties and businesses, whether it's government, even if the opposition, and they can't get anything directly from opposition, then the largest business groups hedge their bets. They also give money to the opposition, not for immediate benefits, but in case opposition wins at some point and comes in, they'll get something as well. So this is one problem. So we're talking of political, not having a proper public funding. You're forcing parties to get money from the private sector, some of it by corruption. The other problem is the problem of democracy is undermined, because all the political parties have to be on good terms with the business class. You're more concerned. So you talk nice things to the people. We talk about programs, welfare programs, and all that. But you must make sure you don't anger the business people. And anyway, because they're giving you money, and they want to come and see you, they want to call you out for dinner and all that. You got to go. So they have much more access to you. They have much more opportunities to advocate their positions. So I would say the lack of public financing actually undermines democracy in a society. So this is all arguments for public funding. Corruption and the undermining of democracy, because it gives the richest 1% much more access to the political elite. I mean, look, if I get $1 million from someone and he says, hey, come on, can we meet for lunch? I'm not going to say, no, sorry, I'm busy. I'm going to say, yeah, sure, where can we go? Isn't it? I mean, he's not asking me anything definite, but I will then know his views. He'll share his concerns, and I'll tend to see things more his way because of that meeting, is it? So, I think it undermines democracy, okay? So definitely, I would say we in the PSM are for public funding, But I think the mechanism of funding is very important. It's very important. And the mechanism that's put out by Bersih, talking about, of course, vote share is much better than seat share. Vote share the parties get is much better. But the thing is, in Malaysia, a lot of smaller parties like mine will not stand in many seats, though we may have support there, because it's the first past the post system. If you want to stand in a particular seat, where we have some support, not much, but we'll have some support, it'll contribute towards this political funding. But then if we stand there, we will make the PH, our closest ally, lose. Might make them lose by splitting the vote. So we are constrained from standing in many seats. Because if it were a proportional representation, it's not a problem. You could all stand, see? But it's first past the post. This system of vote share actually discriminates against small parties who have to give way for the larger parties, so we don't split votes and the enemy doesn't win, kind of thing. That kind of argument is very strong and it's very real. That's how we need to read politics in this country. I mean, this system, is it? So this mechanism of funding isn't quite fair to small parties that will have to give way, can only stand for a few seats because that's what the big brother said, he can only give you these 3 seats, you stand there. You'll never make the percentage. And we'll be the poorest parties and we'll never get our views said. So I don't think it's going to work. I mean, from our point of view, this kind of funding is better than nothing to cut down corruption and all that. But for minority parties, for small parties coming up, it's not very fair. So actually what we suggest actually is that if you have proportional representation at any level, let's say, for example, if we say we're going to have an additional 100 seats in parliament going in on top of the 222, we got another 100, and that's for proportional representation. And then you link your political funding to the proportional representation vote, that'll be okay. But in the absence of that, we would say have a third ballot list where all the political parties that are registered under the SPR are listed. And the voter gets to choose. I want party A to get my $10 per year to the next election. Because although the party is not standing in my constituency, either from parliament or for state, that party is saying things that I think are good. The party is advocating issues that I think are important. And so I want to put my $10 for that party for the next per year for the next 5 years, the next election. So that actually democratizes the whole process. And that also makes democracy more functional, because as a political party, I want to showcase that I am speaking out for the common man. I'm putting forward these kind of things. I'm doing this kind of research. I'm doing this kind of engagement, town halls with people. I'm taking your ideas, I'm advocating. Give me your $10 per year, vote for me on this third list. It'll push all political parties to actually to woo the voters by showing them that you are focusing on their problems. Instead of having dinners with the big 1% to get their money, it'll change the focus of political leaders to the ordinary person. So I think it'll be very healthy for democracy if you have that in Malaysia, that this political funding comes in by the voter. The voter himself, herself actually votes. So this is what I think we would suggest. Huh? Now, the other thing I think that we also brought up in the report, but it's not really, I think we didn't have the time to talk about it. It's about election campaigns. In election campaigns, I've done election campaigns. There is so much money being given out by parties which are in power. But in the end, our upper limit is about 200,000. We hardly spend that. But the BN, by our estimate in Sungai Siput, spends about 2 million, 3 million easily, but not by the candidate. Of course, the candidates' reports are all very correct. But people come in and have dinners. People come in and finance concerts every day. People go and give laptops. Not the candidate, but the candidate is invited to the event. But it's given out by. So I think that there are laws which are not enforced. There should be the law saying that no one else should come and spend money during election campaign. It is not enforced. So you have a lot of third parties coming in and spending money on behalf of the MIC candidate, in my constituency. Tons of it, So so that is a big issue, because if you don't do that, then money politics is there, it's there. So I think you got to look into things like that. The point of having all big donors to be transparent, who are your big donors. I think that's important. See, right now, okay, this is also linked to the political parties being under ROS. Because political parties are under the ROS, and ROS under the Home Minister, and the Home Minister isn't impartial. I mean, the PSM, for example, our registration was delayed for 10 years. We were thought to be, all kinds of excuses that we were thought to be a security risk and all that. For 10 years, we had taken to court finally, So even now, the Pakatan, the Perikatan government, the way they're dealing with Muda, for example, the way they're dealing with even UMNO, its elections, you weaponize the ROS against your enemies. So a lot of funders are afraid. People will come and give me money and say, this is for your party, but please don't send me a receipt. Please don't record it down anywhere. Because they're scared that the government can be vindictive. If you're a government servant, or if you are someone who's having some business dealings with the government, you don't want this to be known. You want to support a particular opposition party, but you're afraid. And the fear is not unfounded, you see. So only if political parties, are under a separate commission, an independent commission, not under the ruling government, there's some freedom, So I think this is a reality there, So many people give me money and say, please don't tell. So that is entirely up to my integrity, because it's opaque. No one knows. If I keep 50% of that and give 50% to the party, who knows? No one knows, And so that is the problem. Even my party wouldn't know, because how would they know? Because it's supposed to be secret, No one will know. Even if I say so much I got from anonymous donors, how do you know I've put in everything, all the anonymous donors? I get 20 anonymous donors, and I put, only 75% of the amount, 25% I keep aside. Who would know? It is not knowable, you know what I mean? So the system actually opens the gates for misuse, It misuses the system itself. And it's partly also because of the ROS and being the Home Minister, the whole fear of being vindictive. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is this thing of constituency fund. The fact that the ruling government tends to give it to its members and denies it to the opposition members. In fact, I took a court case against us, against the minister of, against the prime minister actually. I took a court case and I lost the court case. Saying my argument was you shouldn't penalize the voters who voted opposition, and but anyway, that's the court case. But I don't think it's a good idea to give too much money to the politician to act as Santa Claus. I think it creates the feudal nature of politics in Malaysia. It consolidates that. If I'm sitting on a 3 million per year budget, which I give out to all the NGOs and to all the temples, and everyone comes to me and says, YB, and all that, isn't it? I mean, they all want to be nice to me, right? Because I control the money. And they're nice to me, I give it to them. Not able to speak openly. Actually, the role of the elected rep is to look into issues. What are the policy concerns? Why is that? What are these problems? And focus on that. We're not a extended welfare department. We're not Santa Claus. But giving us 3 million a year, tends to shift it towards being Santa Claus. And if you want to do it properly also, it's not easy, You've got to have a whole set of staff. You've got to have a look at all these projects. You've got to have paperwork. A lot of your time is spent managing this welfare fund, And because you have it, you have to use it. But I think it takes away attention. One, it makes you a small-time local Raja, Even now, there's too much respect. You tend to put your YB on a pedestal. The fact you have 3 million behind you to give out every year puts you on a higher pedestal, and people don't question. And your role is not that. You're supposed to be a friend of the people, to go down and sit on the floor with them, talk to them, find out the issues, which policies are not working, go and change the policies, not give $100 or $200 to the people you need. So I think this constitution, of course, we need money to have an office. We need money to have staff. I used to have 3 or 4 staff working under me. You need money for researchers. Yes. Maybe you need money for emergency fund. If a single mother comes, there's no food in the house, you can give some money, go and buy some food. Maybe for that emergency spending. But not huge amounts for development, for your temple, for your school. That goes back to the feudal system, Are we a feudal political system? But then my role as a politician is to make sure I get enough money so I can feed all these people, but I am not accountable in other ways. Then jumping party is good. If my party was in ruling power, my party loses power, I jump to the new ruling party so I can get the money. The guy in Sarawak did that. If that is my role, is to make sure I get the 3 million per year to give out, if that's my major role as far as my constituents go, then I should jump jump wherever I get the money so I can continue this. So I think that's the issue you got to see. Do you want this constitutional and funds should be equal, but it shouldn't be for this kind of pork barrel politics, to hand out. You should be serving your people by looking into their problems. Why is there B20? Why is the price of rubber so low? Why are our wages so low? Why is there underemployment among our graduates? These are structural issues. If you're looking at that, and not handing out $100 here, $200 there, $500 there. That is not what we're supposed to be doing. So I think that is the other thing, whether we want to have huge constituency funds. Now I think it's coming to about 3 million. Under the PH government, it's 3 million per MP on their side, and less for the MP on the other side. I think this is getting too much. When I was an MP and I took the case, it was 1 million for all the BN MPs and none for us. Now it's become 3 million for the PH MPs when they were in power, and none for not none, maybe about 100,000 for the others. I'm not sure what the PN is doing now, but I don't think that's the right way to go. It's undermining democracy. That's really bringing up feudal things. And I think I've spoken enough. I'll stop here and I'll take questions. And thank you once again for inviting me for this.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for your thoughts and recommendations. Okay, now our session will be a question and answer session. We're going to pose to all the panelists questions. May I start with Mr. Kok Hin first? Can you give your thoughts on the recommendation on and the suggestion from the other two panelists regarding with your reports. Like Aira is talking about, we're talking about the inequality in political parties, then yeah, stuff like that. And then you are talking about transparency, with transparency will be definitely some issues with the donors, other things that, and also Dr. Kumar talking about the system itself is already breed the corruptions. Yeah, yeah, it laid a good foundation to be corrupt. So there are things that, can you comment on this?
Well, of course, I definitely agree with Aira and Dr. Kumar. It's actually not the first time that they both heard and also gave feedback for this report, and also our research with them as well. So I definitely appreciate the feedback then and also now. So Aira punya question. So basically, transparency is basically, it boils down to whether you want to tie public funding to a broader political financing reforms. Now there are pros and cons of doing that. Yeah, the pros, of course, like Professor Gomez would argue, you would need a comprehensive political financing reform. If not, this is for what? That's what the line that some people would take. However, do keep in mind that if you do attach public funding proposal to a broader political financing reform, such as disclosing identity of donors, disclosing private donations, then the whole package may not necessarily get the buy-in that is required to pass this proposal. So basically, it's like you increase the stake, which may reduce the buy-in. So it's really up to the strategy that whichever coalition or civil society or political parties that want to advocate this reform, this is what you should think about, right? This is what we should think about, strategize, right? Basically, public funding is actually probably one of the lowest hanging fruit, right? It's a low hanging fruit in terms of the whole political financing reform agenda. The reform agenda that you can pursue in political financing, public funding is probably one of the low hanging fruit because it can get buy-in quite easily from the established people who has the enough votes to pass it. It's like only 18, right? Basically. About Dr. Kumar's point about undermining democracy and so on, definitely agree with that. I think that's one of the main things that people usually say this, especially in the United States and so on. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, in Australia, they actually disclose identity of donors only above certain amount. So maksudnya not everyone is required to disclose their identity, which I think is good actually. Like Dr. Kumar said, there are some small time donors who do not want the identity to be disclosed. And to be fair, their donation is not big enough to affect a whole election, unlike some donors who can donate 1 or 2 million, if not more, to easily swing an entire party's position on an issue. This is different from, let's say, I donate 50 ringgit to Dr. Kumar's campaign in Ismail Siput. This is like talking about buying a political party's position on an important issue. So that's something that we can actually design, actually. You disclose identity only above, let's say, 1 million. If you donate, let's say, 500,000 and above, Let's see. Actually, Aira, I believe, you can actually talk more about the broader political financing reform as well, right? Because you're also doing a paper on that. Actually, if you want to talk about that also, I think it'd be interesting.
Okay, for the comments from the response from the Kok Hin, for the panelists. I want to pose a question to Ms. Aira. Talking about the reforms in the political finance, but you see there's a lot of factors. There's so much of holes in various institutions. You have problem with AG, MACC, the EC, so much of problem institution. So how do you think this, how it going to work? At the same time now, we have the opportunity of the agreement as if from the government and the opposition, they are going to work on reforms. do you think is it successful? Do you are optimist? And do you think what the first thing that should be done before all this happens? Because there's so much thing happening for many years, and so embedded in society. How this reform to start, and to how this public funding is going to survive in the kind of a very hostile environment. This is Aira.
Thank you, Dato Halim and Kok Hin. Actually, okay, I'll touch on several things lah, which is the transparency requirement. I know is it's a huge ask, right, from civil society to political parties, because as I mentioned just now, the culture is just completely non-existent even within political parties, especially these long established ones who have been in power for decades. Even within parties, there is no transparency in funding. So, for example, only the party treasurer and party president, for example, will know how much money the party has or how the money is managed and where the money comes from. So, IDEAS has done a couple of workshops with youth wings of political parties across the country to actually raise awareness about why political funding is important. And this is one of the key feedback that they will give us, which is we also don't know where our party gets money from. This information is not being shared with with members at all levels. So of course there are requirements under Societies Act for parties to submit their audited accounts and all that. But I mean, number one, that there are many ways to get around that, and number two, that information is not it's not complete, right? So you have parties that as I mentioned earlier, parties with extensive business networks that use proxies, who form companies and hold money and assets through those means, which no one really knows how much. So even within parties, the transparency is non-existent. So it is a big ask. I agree, but I also agree with you that public funding is a way to get our one foot through the door, right? So getting that one foot through the door, I think, is really, really important. And there are ways, I think, to manage the transparency requirement to make it a bit more palatable, I suppose, for parties. So what you suggested, which is introducing the threshold, only donors above a certain amount, and also we have we can introduce other measures in which that can be managed a bit so that it's a bit more acceptable for parties. On top of that, actually another thing that can be done to wait for the whole Political Financing Act to be passed in Parliament is still a long way to go, right? At the moment, it's not even in the MOU at the moment, political financing. So that's a long way away. But what can be done, and what I have recently done a bit of research on, is that we can actually use the Companies Act to compel companies to declare the political donations that they make. So there are provisions in the Companies Act. And this is what I will talk about, I will propose in one of my papers, is actually there are already provisions in the existing Companies Act 2016 where the company directors can ensure that certain disclosures are being made to SSM. Right, so political donations that a party makes, there are ways to compel companies to make that disclosure through the Companies Act, which is really quite extensive. So and that can already be done. Actually, it's just that it's not being done, right? So that's why I think SSM is probably a good stakeholder to bring into the discussion, to see how this can be done, because you don't need to amend any law or like enact some new law. It's already there in the act itself. So that's one thing that I think can be done without the going through parliament and all that. So on Dato Halim's question about institutions, definitely I think that's why political transparency in political financing must come with all the other slew of reforms that civil society has been talking about for a long time. So MACC, AGC, independence, that's one thing. Another thing is, if we get this Political Financing Act enacted, so the big question is who is going to then regulate the finances, right? Is it still going to be EC? Is it going to be ROS? Or are we going to have another body to do it? So that's why if we want to introduce another body, then the independence of that body is then just absolutely crucial, and that needs to be independent from the start. Okay, so it cannot be under Prime Minister's office. In Malaysia, we love putting everything under the Prime Minister's office. So it absolutely cannot be under Prime Minister's office. Who are you going to appoint to that body? How are you going to do that appointment? The Prime Minister can't be appointing these people because of the clear conflict of interest that's going to come with that. So there's a lot to think about there when it comes to institutions. One more thing I would like to add about institutions, and this relates to Dr. Jeyakumar's very good point about our elected reps and this expectation of them to be a sort of Santa Claus / welfare officer to constituents. So this is why, and this is also very true in the workshops that we did. A lot of the feedback that we get from these young politicians across the country is precisely this, that their constituents have an expectation for their elected reps to practically do everything and provide everything for them. And there are two sides to this, right? So on one side, of course, here, this is where you come with your education on what democracy is, what is the role of your MP, what is the role of your ADUN. We don't have local council elections, that's the other thing. So there's that, but then there's also this big question that Dr. Jeyakumar also rightly pointed out, which is where are our state institutions in providing the basic goods and infrastructure that our people need, that constituents are relying upon individual politicians to provide this for them. So this is something that's really important to think about. In my own work on political financing and some of the pegawai of the MPs that I've interviewed, officers that work in parliamentary constituencies, this is the feedback that they give me. So I would ask them, so why is it that your constituents would come to your pusat khidmat to ask for beras or ask you to even pay their phone bills for them, very basic stuff, yeah. So why is it that they go to Jabatan Kebajikan Masyarakat, for example, where is the JKM officer in your kawasan? They'll say yeah, we have a JKM officer, but one JKM officer right now needs to take care of 200 or 400 cases. Can you imagine? One individual is in charge of 200 cases, yeah. That's completely, I just can't imagine how that is. And I don't know why our JKM officers are being put in this position. And it's impossible. They can't carry out their work because, I don't know why. Maybe it's underfunded, understaffed or whatever it is. But in general, there is this culture of money needs to flow through individual MPs rather than empowering the local JKM or the local lembaga zakat or whatever government body that is supposed to provide this kind of basic goods for the people. So there are multiple layers to this, and all of it contributes to the opaque and corrupt system that we have at the moment. So a lot of reforms need to actually move at the same time. So I know I just said that we need one thing to get our foot through the door, but I hope that we remember that the political financing problem is all encompassing in Malaysia. It relates to so many other different things in our society. And it's important to look at all those issues as well together as we talk about transparency in political funding. Yeah, that's all for now. Thanks, Dato.
Thank you, Ms. Aira, for your extensive, well-detailed suggestions. I go to Dr. Kumar. Dr. Kumar, there's a question from the audience, from Andrew Koo, asking that is it possible to have a hybrid system where the political parties choose to receive a public funding and then they have to abide with all the regulation, or the political party just keep on their own finance and they don't follow the regulations of as a public funding? Is it possible to have a two-tiers of a hybrid system? And then what's your suggestion if another question where there's the candidate is for independent, how to get the threshold dependent? Or could we base on the voters per seat percentage rather than absolute number? Possible that if contest in a few seats and then they put on percentage of the voters that depend on how much the political party got the percentage, then they're eligible to get the funding. What are your opinions on this, Mr. Kumar?
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think hybrid system is possible. I think Kok Hin also talked about it, that the government gives a certain amount of money, to the political party based on some formula, but the political party can also raise funds on its own. I think that is possible. And I think when you're talking about political financing, I think what Kok Hin said is important also. We don't aim for the moonlight. We try and take a first step. And I think getting a law here where a significant amount of money is channeled to political parties from the public coffers, that at once straight away reduces the need for political parties to go to private, donors. I think that's a very good first step. And then once you get the first step in, then maybe along the line we can strengthen it. We can, talk about transparency and what Kok Hin talked about. People more than a certain amount, funding more than a certain amount per year for a political party, they've got to be, transparent and be identified. I think we can build on it. But if we come with a package which is too restrictive, the political parties themselves will say, no, this is not online. So I think we can start with the hybrid system. And if you see it as a journey towards a better political system that is more responsive to the ordinary person and not taken over by the corporate class, it's a journey. So it starts off with the first step. So don't talk of what you want at the final. Of course, we know what we want at the final, but you don't have to put it all in the first step. Get the first step through. So I would go for that. The thing about percentage, you see, the other thing about political funding, we may actually have to tweak it. One part is elected reps should get enough to run their offices, the constituency officers, the constituency officers, their full-timers, their research officers. I think each member of parliament and each state assembly person needs to get that. So that is one part of the political funding that's based on seats. But it's a small, maybe it's currently about $200,000 a year or something for all these things. So that is something separate. The other one is the political party based on what I will suggest is the political support the party received from the electorate, And we got to tweak it to see, like I said earlier, votes overall is better than seats. It's more equitable, but then it's not good for small parties which can't compete. So, so the third vote thing is what idea we are suggesting. And it actually, in terms of administration, is not difficult. Because that one, the amount of money you're going to give to each political party is the number of votes. So even the EC can do it. Even the EC in fact, now there's some idea of having a separate commission for parliament. A separate commission that looks after the whole parliamentary affairs. Maybe they can look after this part of it, because it's going entirely by the number of votes on the third ballot. Then there's no question of discretion. When you have discretionary power, then you've got to make sure that that party is completely independent, not influenced by any of the political parties. But if the allocation is very, very rule-based, the political party gets $8 a year based on the number of votes that people cast on this third ballot. It's very fixed. So just based on that, so that's only administrative. Yeah, I think something we can talk about. And I think just public funding, public financing, I think is something that people will be able to accept. And we've got to point out that we're talking about, say, $10 per voter per year to the party that he or she votes. We're talking about 20 million voters coming elections. So 10 times 20 is 200 million per year. It's a good sum of money, you know. But you compare it to the Malaysian budget, which is 300 billion, what Kok Hin said earlier, you know, this is less than 0.1%, you know. And what we're gaining for this is you're cutting down corruption and you're reducing the power of the corporate class on our politicians. You're democratizing the whole political process, you know, and you're making political parties, then they got to play to the gallery of voters. They've got to show voters how they are relevant to the voters' needs. So actually, it's got a lot of externalities, you know, what do you call externalities, a lot of extra positive things that come from it. So I think it's something we can actually sell, you know, we can actually sell this idea to the public and get some sort of financing in. I mean, the extra bits, you know, about, you know, election spending and about all that, also important. But I think I agree with Kok Hin. Don't put everything, don't front load it. Get the act in, get it started. Then after that, once it's in, just like SOCSO, you know, SOCSO came in, it was quite minimal. We kept on adding more and more things to SOCSO, you know. So I think that's how we should go about it. This kind of programs, we should think of it not as a final product, but put in something, and then after that, see how we can, after 5 years, try and make it better, improve it, and all that. So that'll be, I think, a good strategy for. I think we'll look at strategy as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think that's what start to move forward, slow by slow, slowly, and then hopefully the more reforms can be added from time to time. I think that's very good policy. Kok Hin, there is a question regarding with the independence winner. How do you put the equation? Those who independent who wins, of course, definitely. He has or she, the MPs of the independent cannot get the threshold. How they get the public fundings?
Okay. So thank you, Shariza, right? The one who asked the question. So kalau we follow the vote base, no problem lah, because you know, it doesn't matter whether you are independent or not, as long as you get the percentage of vote, you even if you do not win, right? So you are saying independent winners. It doesn't even have to be independent winners. Yeah. Independent candidates that obtain above a certain percentage of votes, you get the funding. We do not, for those with political parties, right? Of course, it goes to parties rather than candidates. We believe that is fairer because, I mean, first past the post system, people vote mostly based on party. But more broadly, I actually do agree with Dr. Kumar that no matter how much we tweak the criteria, there are restrictions involved in first past the post electoral system. People will still vote a certain way, privileging the winner, right? Although we go for vote share, it will still be a bit problematic lah. Actually, when Dr. Kumar brought it out the first time that we spoke about it, there were some discussion lah. Of course, some of us are quite sympathetic to it, but it's just more of administrative and social strategy lah. Do we add more complication to it, or should we just sell it for now? Let's go ahead with it and then see how it goes. I'm definitely sympathetic to it, but in terms of strategy, of course, I think we have to market it other than being a third vote, because third vote people associate with local government, right? That's the push for local government. That's a third vote. So maybe need a different narrative lah for that. So yep. Hopefully I answered the question, Dr. Halim.
Yeah. There's another question from Helen Ting. He asking about can we punish those who do get the female representative, so that by reduce the party that have less female representative, reduce the public funding.
Right. So about that, but they don't. Okay. The way we design and propose it is more about incentivizing. So basically, we are not looking as much as deterrence compared to incentive. We want to incentivize it in a positive way. But of course, what Dr. Helen Ting suggested can work as well. So in a way, it's a reverse incentive, right? You provide a deterrence. So that can work as well, depending on how we design it. For the previous question about from Andrew Koo about the hybrid system, right? Yes. Dr. Kumar already kind of answered it, but I also said that in some countries they do implement that kind of hybrid system in the sense that it's optional whether you want that public funding or not. So I think that also can be implemented. So that would be kind of tied into what Aira suggested. So if you want that public funding, then you have to do certain steps, but it's not mandatory. So the way that Dr. Kumar, Aira, and myself coming from, if we make it mandatory, it will reduce the buy-in because of all the parties are maybe hesitant and so on. You have to come with broader reforms. But if you want a middle compromise and so on, you can do that, but make it not mandatory lah.
But they will benefit for the richer and bigger political parties, or they are out of the regulations and they can do whatever they can do. If you allow the choice options, no. So they already got a lot of money, and then they can get it from the public, from the private. That's what usual.
No, what we mean is optional, as in if you want the public funding, you have to disclose. If we want to tie in with the broader reforms, right?
Okay.
So basically, there are three things that we're discussing just now. Okay, number one is we sell public funding sahaja, right?
Yeah.
So that's the position that this paper was coming from. Only the public funding. Don't go with the broader reforms yet. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is sell public funding alongside all the other reforms, public political financing. And then there's this middle one. And this middle one says, we implement public funding with the broader political financing, but it's optional. So if political party want this public funding, then you have to disclose and so on. But if you choose not to disclose, then you don't get this public funding. It's not that, I dapat this money, then I don't disclose anyway. Not like that lah. Of course, everybody will just want the money without disclosing, right? So it's a spectrum lah. Like we said, it's a spectrum. It's not an either or. We can definitely design it in different ways.
Yeah, of course. Some equality there, because the richer will have more leverage and more option they have for richer. They have got the businesses, they got all this. Okay, I think I don't have any more questions. Just like to, before we go to the closing speech, I would like to have the rumusan summary conclusion from what your presentation from each panelist. We start with Kok Hin first.
I think basically I've said what I want to say. I think maybe Thomas here, if you want to add from Bersih's position as well, what you think is a step forward. So I mean, I can pass my time to him if he likes. So thank you, Dr. Ali.
Yeah, Thomas will have the closing, and then he will wrap all the points. Okay, Miss Aira, can you make a short conclusion what you been proposed?
Thank you. Thanks again to everyone, Perludem, Bersih, Kok Hin for the extensive research that you've done on this. I think when it comes to political financing, this proposal of public funding, I think has gained a lot of quite a lot of traction, I would say, amongst some of the politicians that I've spoken to. So I really would recommend that civil society continues the push for this, because it could be the foot through the door that we need at the moment. The in terms of the larger reforms, it will need to come together as well. But I hope that this particular thing about public funding can be pushed. I think maybe a bit more extra push lah on this. So I would like to see this public funding issue being amplified actually by other civil society actors. And at the same time, I would also urge civil society politicians to also think of political financing as an entire ecosystem that affects everything, our not just our politics but also our economy, our social policy, because it is so entrenched in our system. And the reforms that we need to do is it's a lot, and it's all encompassing. So we need that broader approach as well at the same time. So thank you so much again to everyone, and I'll pass it to Dr. Jeyakumar now.
Yeah, Dr. Kumar, please have your conclusion and conclude the discussion today on your thoughts and point of views.
Thank you, Dato. Thank you. Okay, first of all, I think it's very good that Perludem and Bersih are having sponsoring this discussion. I think it's a very important topic. If you look at democracy throughout the world, I think it's work in progress. We are supposed to be democratic, but there are a lot of gaps and weaknesses in our system. We're not really as democratic as we should be. And this kind of ideas like political financing, public financing of political parties will improve the level of democracy. Things like participatory budgeting at grassroots level, things like mechanisms to make sure there's more women participation. These are all interconnected and also all important for democracy. And of course, it's very important, again, the political education. I mean, ultimately, if we have democracy without political education, without an educated public, then any demagogue can just spin, and become into power. I mean, look at what's happening in the West. When you have right-wing demagogues just going on lies and fear, xenophobia, and fear of the other, and they're actually winning. They're winning elections. They are a potent force in the US and in some of the European countries. So I mean, democracy, if you don't have an educated public who understand the issues, then we're going to have more Trumps and Bolsonaros in the future. I mean, Modis, I mean, who are playing ethnic, religious sentiments and getting away with it and succeeding. And the only way around that is proper political education. So I think there's a lot of work that we have to do if we really believe in democracy. Democracy ultimately depends on the public. And the public can be swayed by some ethnic and religious. We can think it's nonsense, but they're swayed by it. Then we are sunk, So that is, I think, these are the things that, if we believe in democracy, these are the problems that we are facing. That we need. Democracy is work in progress. It's a good idea. It's a good idea, but you haven't actually achieved it yet. And it's work in progress. And this is one good thing. I mean, this thing of political financing, public financing is a good idea, but also other things that we need to do. And I think it's good that Bersih and Perludem are doing this. And I think what Kok Hin said about having strategies to see that, and what Aira also said, get the foot in first, get it in first. Even if it's not in a perfect form, fine, get it in. Then we try and tweak it as it gets in. And you work on the other things as well. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the panelists, Kok Hin, Aira, and Dr. Kumar for all this discussion for this morning. And I think everybody are very excited because the reforms are now the talk of the day. Everybody's talking about the reforms, how the changes, even though we don't see much changes yet, but it's actually the first step of getting to the correct directions. So thank you very much for all the panelists, for all the good discussions. Now we are at the time for the closing speech. And I would like to invite Mr. Thomas Fine, chairperson of Bersih, to wrap up and to do the closing speech. Yes, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Dr. Halim. And really thank you, the presenter, Kok Hin, and the panelists for your contributions. I think it is a big topic, a vast topic, political financing, and we can have several days of conferences and still not cover everything. But I think the focus this morning very much was on public funding, because that is one of the mechanism basically to fund political parties. Now, I think this idea, as Aira has said, is gaining traction among the politicians. But I think also that the challenges that we have is also to persuade our Malaysian public that the political party do need to be funded. It is not a popular idea, I believe, simply because of the disillusionment with the political situation, much of it blame on politicians and parties. So there's a sense that they are undeserving of any taxpayers' money. But I just give a very simple and crude reasoning for public funding. And that is, like all entities, organizations, political parties, politics need money. And if you do not provide funding, they will find funding elsewhere, oftentimes illegally and under the table. And that money comes from our own national resources, public funds. And so whether you fund directly or not, money will come, and it will come indirectly. So it's better that we have public funding so that there is a legitimate requirement for transparency and accountability by the recipients of these funds. And also I think the strategy, I totally agree. Some civil society groups would think that we know what is the ideal. The whole package is all or nothing. You either buy the whole package or you don't buy. No, I think we know that this is a very complex issue, like all issues. Advocacy is the small push, the small steps, but making the right steps in the right direction is better than no step at all. So public funding been, I think, lower hanging fruit to persuade the lawmakers to make it into law should come first. Whether it should be done in a hybrid manner, as raised by Andrew Koo, I think we need further thinking about it. My concern is that, if you give that option to political party, they will be asking, if I take public funding, I'm getting 5 million a year, but on my own, I'm getting 50 million. So I would probably opt out so that I don't have to comply with disclosure, don't have to comply so much with being accountable to the law, to the government or the people. So I think it needs further thinking about that. Then the other issue of the whole package, political financing issue, where we want transparency, accountability, and also control on the limits, things like that. In Malaysia, political financing has been in conversation for more than 10 years, both from civil society and even opposition and government talk. I mean, to quote Greta Thunberg at the recent climate change, just blah, 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 more blah, 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 and not going anywhere. And recently we had a major political event in a sense of a signing of a memorandum of understanding for political stability and transformation, where the government for the first time signed this MOU with the main opposition party, Pakatan Harapan, for a list of reforms, 18 reforms, but notably absent was political financing. Simply because on both sides there's not enough political will to make that a reality. That is, and part of the reason why even the opposition, you would imagine, would support it strongly, is that why they don't is because of the punitive nature, vindictive nature of politics in Malaysia. If you are in government and you know, because of political financing disclosure, who is funding who or who is donating to who, likely, as Dr. Kumar said, these companies, these individuals will be punished either by, the income tax department will be sent to go after them, MACC, will be sent to weaponized to go after these supporters of the opposition. So that's why even the opposition is not keen to support that. Of course, the government is not keen because when you are government, you have access to all sort of funding, public funding, private funding. Everybody wants to be with the winner. So then how do we make it happen? Start with public funding, but also it entails a broader reform. All the other institutions that I mentioned, income tax, MACC, which is our anti-corruption agency, the Attorney General's Chamber, all this has to be made fully independent and professional so that they do not become weapon of the government of the day. It has to go hand in hand before we can see the total package coming to pass. So it's never a simple issue like many of the reforms that we are talking about, but it's complex. So when it's complex, then we have to think about strategy. We got to think about small steps and even about some compromises. It's not a bad word sometimes, just to get a foot in. And then from then on, we build and build and build until we reach the full package. So I think with that, I really thank Peludem for spearheading this initiative among the regional countries to talk about this issue. We fully acknowledge that every country has their unique issues and challenges and also solutions. So that's why we look forward to learn from each other so that we can improve this situation on political financing. So with that, I thank you and hand the time back to Peludem or Dr. Halim. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Thomas, for the closing speech. Then I think we are at the end of the session, and on behalf of Bersih and Peludem, I'd like to thank the panelists, the guests, Mr. Ooi Kok Hin, Ms. Aira, Dr. Kumar, for a long, lengthy discussion this morning. A lot of things that have been pointed out, and I think the discussion will be continued. As Thomas said, we try to define and discuss and make people on the bandwagon for these big issues in the democracy, which is a political party finance, which is, I think, the much easier things of reform that can be done. Okay, with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you very much, and then we see again for next session for the webinar. And thank you very much for the Peludem to be with Bersih, organize this series of lectures and conference in commemoration with the International Democracy Day. That's a chance to review all the practices of democracy in each region. Thank you very much, and see you again next time. And hopefully everybody in good keep healthy and safe with the pandemic. Thank you very much. Good day. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you very much.